Great. Welcome everyone to our seminar. For those who don't know about or who are new to InterReach, I want to go ahead and give a little bit of an intro to um, our series and our organization. InterReach is a community of practice for professionals and scholars who work at the intersection of disciplines and other types of boundaries seen in academic research teams to support, study, and enhance their collaborative capacity. This year's focus is on intentional integration and how to evaluate the effectiveness of team science approaches. So the community has and will explore methods for measuring the impact of these approaches on individuals, teams, and their research outcomes, aiming to determine what should be measured to assess their success. The series has included input from researchers, evaluators, and practitioners in the field. So we're very excited for today's speaker, Maritza Salazar Campo, who will be speaking about measuring what matters in interdisciplinary collaboration, developing and testing the perspective integration capability scale. Maritza Salazar Campo is an assistant professor of organization and management at the Merage School of Business at UC Irvine. Her research has been featured by the National Academies of Science and the National Institutes of Health to enhance the impact of collaborative team science in research and practice. She serves as the faculty lead of the Latinx initiative at the Merage School of Business, which helps support over 1,000 current students and alumni to advance from college to career. She has won numerous awards for outstanding teaching and mentoring, and she was named one of the OC 50, shaping the future of healthcare through her efforts to develop cutting-edge leadership education for regional healthcare administrators. So I'm going to hand it over to Maritza, and please feel free to ask questions in the chat throughout the presentation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kim, and the rest of the InterReach team for having me today. It's a pleasure to see so many of you online, friends and colleagues from all over the world. I'm going to present something that's a good mix, I think, of practitioner and sort of evidence-based and research-based, but it always helps me to know what my audience is looking for. So I suppose the first question I have for you, so that I can make sure that I cover what you're most interested in, is what made you take time out of your busy lunch, or for, I think it was Francisco, why, being up at the wee hours of the morning on the opposite side of the globe, maybe a little bit about something that you're interested in learning from me. And I'll go ahead and kick this off. So first of all, I want to say that we are in a tough line of work. Probably more than ever in society, people are really anchored in what they believe to be true. I think a lot of the experts we work with, their careers probably feel a little bit under fire. They're looking to defend their perspectives, to defend their funding. And all of that makes us really steep into a sort of focus on self. And this presentation I'm going to give, I hope, shed some light on the way we help people to start to think about what is it that others have to offer, and then how can we nudge the sort of internal mental model that someone has about the question that they're trying to solve or the work they're trying to do. And I come from this partially thinking about this as an educator, as a scholar, thinking about the concept of integration. And I want to begin first. I'm going to put my slides up here in a moment and share with you some of this work. But I want to first give credit where credit is due, which is to say that I believe joining the call fairly soon is my doctoral advisor, Teresa Lant. She was a professor for many years at NYU Stern School of Business and is now semi-retired. She was at Pace University for a while, but she is now fully fledged doing research and consulting in team science. And this work is work we've done together. Can I get a thumbs up, a Zoom thumbs up that you can see my slides and we're ready to go? Perfect. Thanks, Steve. All right, so let's get started. I by no means have cracked the code on how to get experts to listen to one another. So I'm going to share some work that illustrates how we've begun to nudge the opening, right, and the perspective taking of scholars in a room. And I welcome any feedback and perspective. So this particular presentation, Perspective Integrative Capability and Innovation in Multidisciplinary Team, was funded by an NSF award and subsequently supported by both the CTSAs at UCLA and UC Irvine. So let's begin. It's very fascinating to me to think about how we make progress on tough problems. In current times, right, we're still thinking about challenges around water, around energy, around technology, around the arts. And anytime that we bring people together around diverse perspectives, we have both an opportunity and a liability, right? In that individuals can step into these spaces interested in sharing what they know, tackling that particular common problem area or problem domain. But in these spaces, we still bring together individuals who are often hindered by their own pride, by their own ego, by their desire to demonstrate that they know a lot. And I'm probably not the only one in the room who has stepped into these spaces with experts with years and years of expertise. And the conversation is dominated by, a small subset of voices, often individuals who have more status, individuals who come from fields that are higher in the hierarchy of expertise. And we see very clearly, right, that technical, um, academic expertise isn't the only driver or input into what it is that creates this capacity of an entire team to bring together what everybody knows. And we would argue, though, that if the team can figure out how to weave together the different perspectives, insights, methods, frameworks, we're going to get closer to collective creativity. And that collective creativity, right, again, is one where we're going to see that novel perspectives are synergized and we're getting to future solutions. So I'm going to give a nod to everybody in the room who I think understands, right, that we are in some ways teaching experts how to manage self, how to notice what's going on in their environment, how to be thinking at a meta level about what it is that everybody knows, and to fundamentally be curious about what other disciplines bring to the proverbial research table. And so, one thought here, right, is that if we can use communication as a means to reveal, to share, to integrate, we can somehow form a bridge between what the individual possesses in terms of their expertise and perspectives and have it pooled together to be utilized by everybody in the team. And that through conversation, through a dialectic process, there's going to be an understanding of what is it that everybody brings to the table. Now, I won't belabor all that we know about team communication processes, but I will say if this isn't a body of literature that you're very comfortable with, right, looking at some of the common pitfalls, and I'm digressing here and I'm going to sound like an MBA professor instead, right? Teams love to talk about shared information. Teams love to polarize really quickly and take positions and stances. Individuals tend to defer to, there's an ASQ that's coming out in real time, defer to men over women, right? There's certain common pitfalls that happen in group dynamics that are always things that scientific leaders and team leaders need to be equipped with, essentially bridging what we know about groups and teams and making sure our investigators and people supporting them have this basic understanding. But when we step back and we sort of zoom out and think about, well, what is it exactly that's happening in order to get to what the Interreach group is most interested in, which is integration. So we start again with the sort of potpourri of colored dots I have there on the left to say that we're going to assume that a team is going to go through a dialectic process, information exchange through um, talking. And from that, the group is going to start to accumulate information. They're interacting in varied ways that hopefully create this moment in which team members step into the dialogue further, not just nodding their heads and, yeah, I heard that, but signal that they're engaged with someone else's knowledge. And this can come from a question, this can come from an alternative example. It can come from thinking, well, maybe this is why this data looks like that. But it isn't passive. I heard it and I'm halfway checking my phone. I'm halfway thinking about the next thing I'm saying. But this phase of consideration is where we would see, again, a dialectic interest in the other. And once we have a majority of a team engaged not only in the exchange, but in an active, engaged process of evaluating the entire pool of knowledge, then we can hope we get to this latter phase of integration where there might be a mind shift or a mind altering where someone goes, okay, in my worldview of this problem, I thought this was how, I don't know, this disease mechanism was working. But now that I'm hearing this other view, it makes me wonder if it could be something else or if there's another way to study this. And from that won't necessarily come a complete solution, but there can be the emergence of new pathways. And for all of us in the room, I'm going to guess our primary activity is focused on proposals that could get funded or new pilot projects that could get launched. And so we say, especially in resource constrained times like now, how can we squeeze more juice out of the teams that we currently have, even if they don't have all the funding, through some interaction processes that start to unlock a couple of new ideas? So this notion of information integration is covered in some other work that I've written with Steve and Teresa. And, we do talk about what are the social processes involved? What are the cognitive processes involved? How does a team actually evolve? So I wanted to, sort of take you back before we go forward with that initial early 2012 paper on this. But the question here in Interreach for me and for all of us is to say, okay, but how do we get change? And anytime we're thinking about changing behavior, changing approaches, we have to be thinking about things like how do we increase awareness of the fact that this matters for scientists? How do we make them want to engage in some new practices? And then what are the skills we give them in order to fuel their ability to actually engage in integration? And to know that change is happening, we've got to measure it and track that progress. So traditionally, when we think about integration, there are a couple of ways that it exists in the literature. One is to say, well, what is externalized through dialogue is a direct reflection of what people think. And so there have been efforts to count verbal reports or transcripts, to observe dialectic themes in conversation. I will say there's another measure that sort of looks at whether or not, listening and communication is generally happening. But for Teresa and myself, it felt underwhelming. Like, how do we actually know that someone is having this particular shift in thinking? And again, if we want change, we have to say, can we measure it? Is it actually occurring? And so what we initially tried to do was to think about the change processes that are essential in order to be able to look at a pre and post of integrative capability. So what I'll share with you is an quasi-experimental design And our attempts to develop a measure and to show that it happened, that people were starting to integrate the perspectives of others in real time. Now, there's variability, right? Our scientific teams are in different institutions, they're doing different kinds of work. It's noisy. But I'm hoping that you'll like what we did. All right, so I'm going to step back, and this is where the practitioners in the room, I want you to hear the underpinning of the scale so that you can articulate it to your, I don't know, your research directors or research coordinators at your institutions. But here's the theory underneath the measure. We wanted to suggest that PIC is an individual cognitive process. It's a precondition to team knowledge processing where an individual essentially begins to question or notice someone else's information and then actively begins to say, well, this is changing my schema of the way that I think about this. And that the exposure to some other external information or expertise has caused this shift in their understanding of information. So we make a couple of boundary conditions. We say, hey, look, PIC, we're going to look at it in a social context. I think it could also probably happen if people were interacting online with text. It's not how we studied it, but there's something happening out external to the person's mind that makes them notice, accommodate, and begin to adjust the way that they think. PIC itself has gone through a rigorous 5-study, I believe our samples exceeded several hundred people in order to get to this final set of items. We took literature spanning decades to think about, well, what is it that happens when we capture consideration of what someone else is saying? And how do we accurately assess this mind shift, the accommodation or the assimilation of information into one's existing schema? These items that you're looking at here, I'm going to show you how we got to these. Foreshadowing, this paper is about to come out. You'll have the scales, you'll have the statistics. I know someone in the chat said, I want to be able to apply something quickly. The scales are ready for you. The paper's coming out soon. So we went through the typical researcher approach of going, okay, theoretically, do these items stick together? Empirically, do these items stick together? We did exploratory factor analyses to show that, in fact, we had the scales and the internal reliability that we needed. We replicate this particular set of items with a bunch of other items as well in a completely distinct sample, always people working in interdisciplinary teams, people working in scientific teams, in academic research centers, really trying to ensure that this scale theoretically is picking up what it should, that the items are unique, distinct, and that the sub-factors are internally consistent. We do confirmatory factor analysis to really show that these two facets of PIC are in fact distinct. I will say you can look at the correlation between the two subcomponents. I wish that correlation was a little lower, but it's not surprising to me. All the items are talking about knowledge, information, that there would be that correlation. Either way, we get to a place after we additionally did some work to see sort of on a nomenological network, how is PIC related and distinct from other measures. Whew, it was a lot of effort to get this scale ready to rock and roll. But here's the thing I'm going to guess that all of you logged in to say, can you prove that it's happening? Can you change teams? So we finally say, let's test this measure in a real situation. And we take 26 teams from some top medical research centers around the country, Stanford, Northwestern, Cornell, NYU, UCLA, right? We gather these teams together and we think again that we need to sort of ready the learner to begin to think and interact in group settings differently. I'm going to run you through how we set the conditions for enhanced perspective integrative capability. But I will say that we're going to do this measurement process longitudinally. We're going to take a snapshot of our PIC scale. Each individual on the team is going to get assessed. We're going to do the training. We're going to once again take an assessment of PIC. And then we're going to relate this to some other variables, which I'll show you in just a minute. But let me pause here to see if everyone is still on board. Any questions, anything anybody wants to say or ask? Are we good? Okay. All right. So
We
I
do
did
have
have
one
one.
question.
oh,
I'm sorry,
please.
I'm gonna
Yes.
interrupt. We
Yeah.
do have one
No,
question
go.
in the chat. Bethany asked, what are some of the related constructs PIC is distinct from?
Sure. So we did things like knowledge hiding, knowledge sharing, perspective taking. Uh, we basically took a bunch of different scales to compare and contrast and found uniqueness. There was some there was positive correlation, some where there was negative correlation, but never a correlation above, zero point 0.7 where we were like, oh, this is too close to some other scale. So yes. Let me see. Tania has a question here or comment. We use similar approach, self-integration perception, but the review of our paper noted lack of real knowledge member cannot conclude their real learning occurred. Yes, it is very hard to measure this. Okay. Okay. All right. So I want to maybe give a little bit of background here as well. So prior to this training development, I had logged almost 100 hours of watching different scientific teams interact, sitting in the back of the room, taking notes, trying to figure out why some teams reach this state of flow where turns at talk were moved around the room, why there was richness of taking, sort of pastures of idea development in some meetings, and others where they just never approached that critical state of collective creativity. So some of what's baked into this training is a product of having seen this. And there's some other papers that I have published where you can read about some of those practices and things that we saw. Prior to this training, we did take some of the text and recordings that I had from these videos, stylize that, or from the audio recording, stylize them to de-identify investigators and topics, and use that material to teach ways in which people opened up dialogue and created exchange. And ultimately, that boiled down to, oh, this is in the wrong place. Boiled down to 4 different principles of communication that we taught all the investigators. And those included promotive voice, perspective seeking, reflexivity, and managing connections. And I'm going to give you like a super brief breakdown of those, and I can give you other material if you're interested. I do want to say that what we're going to relate PIC to, though, is an increased understanding of knowing who knows what in the team, essentially a sort of knowledge location ability, and then the willingness to engage with collaborators who draw expertise from outside of their own field. So there are 2 DVs we're going to look at in a minute. Okay. So we take all these teams through about a 15-minute training where we talk about these different principles, we define them, They seem simple enough, right? Great teams engage in a process where people are proposing new ideas, etc. For each of these principles, we say why they don't happen, why they do happen, what their implications are, and we try to provide them with some evidence. We have vignettes that show when this principle is available, what conversation looks like, and then we show when teams start without engaging in these principles. So for all of these too, we back it up as much as we can with evidence from the literature about why the particular principle has also been shown in other contexts to have a positive impact on a team. So again, they're going through this process for each of these of getting a core definition of the variable. So I'm going to spend a little time here. Throughout all of the teaching and training, Teresa and I take the perspective, a la Richard Hackman, leaders are creating context. They're setting conditions for conversation and interaction to really be of a peak form. And so in perspective seeking, we highlight this modeling of leader behavior where an investigator, whether it's the facilitator or the PI, is in one case sort of saying, we're here to do this. Here's my idea. Here's what we wrote in the grant. Read what we wrote. Let us know what you think, which I'm sure you guys have been in so many meetings where that's what it sounds like. In contrast to other PIs who had a rough scaffolding of what it is they wanted from a team. And instead they're saying, look, we really want to understand the underlying driver of why, mice are behaving in this particular way when they're exposed to this stimulus and what could be going on. I'm looking at the room and I see that there are geneticists. I see that there are some addictions people, and I see that there's some nutritionists. Let's try to bring our perspectives together to think about what could be going on. And then they pose an opening question. They highlight who's in the room, and then they seek perspectives. And the difference, my friends, because I know you want to try to increase what's going on in all of your scientific team meetings, is tremendous. In the opening remarks, in the rephrasing, the thing that happens too is that when we teach perspective seeking, this very generous approach to leadership, the consequence is that we see more promotive voice, more different viewpoints are brought up, and each meeting is far more generative. Now, I started out saying we're in a time when people are anchored in proving, knowing, holding on to their turf. This particular behavior is easy to read, easy to go, yeah, that sounds good. Hard to try on when you've been socialized for a decade or so to show how smart you are in every room. But when we can nudge investigators in this way, we really see that they engage in a process that invites people into a conversation, leverages the human capital in the room. Again, we draw them back to literature in the broader field of management as well. But you can see that for each principle, we're providing definition, evidence, examples from their own research domain, and then taking them along. So, quickly, we also talk about reflexivity, which is this concern for keeping track of, where are we, what are our goals, what are our processes, et cetera, and thinking about how a team can run their meetings with some sort of meta knowledge of what are we doing here, where are we going. What's interesting with this one is we really found this strong effect that any team that got stuck on the feasibility of ideas that were generated often found that they inhibited any kind of additional generative ideas. So basically, if the team facilitator or team PI said, we want to get some ideas and let the conversation flow such that they took one idea and let everybody build upon it, add to it, etc. You could see this thorough information elaboration process. Maybe they switch to explore an alternative, maybe one more. So in an hour meeting, 2 to 3 ideas are really explored. Think about an alternative meeting, though, where there's an idea and someone says, well, do we have enough refrigerators to do that? Or how will we possibly get that population to do that study? Or where's that money going to come from? We're looking at these like tiny little start and stops of what's going on in a meeting. So the managing of the process of ensuring that there's fluidity and the opportunity to explore with depth ideas just highlights for these investigators what to manage and how much time to give to certain processes. When we show them the flows of how a meeting can look, they then see that they're really like an architect of a meeting, deciding how to structure and open up dialogue and for how long, making sure that there's not arbitrary, stopping or blocking of ideation processes. Every time that they're more aware of this, you really just see the pool of information that's available is greater. Last but not least, we highlight, look, you've all come to this meeting, you all have something to add. We tend to go, my sociologist colleagues love to say, we tend to go to events to meet people and stand right next to the person we came with that we know really, really well. And the same thing happens in our scientific meetings. People come from the same department and they're talking to people that they know. So it's an invitation to say, guess what? It's like being at a treasure hunt. Somewhere in the room is somebody who's using a different kind of a hammer, a different kind of a technique. Let's see who knows whom and how we can leverage these connections. We highlight again the sociology of science, all the ways in which bridging connections across unlock. So again, we have our PIC measure. We give this training around the 4 principles. I did my postdoc with Ed Salas, so I'm always thinking about an opportunity to practice to make sure that cognitive knowledge becomes knowledge that one can keep. And you only get that sometimes through a moment of practice. At that point, we let them work on some other team-related things, and we don't bug them for another couple of weeks. And we take that second PIC measure. So we've taught them some new ways. We're hoping that their conversation is different, that we're turning their mind through some of these principles to being outwardly focused, and then we assess. I see some comments in the chat. I just want to make sure, am I missing anything here? No. Okay. Here we go. So we measured a number of different variables pre and post. This is my obligatory, summaries of data. All of this is going to be in the paper coming out. I asked the publisher today, can I give them a pre-copy? And they said, no, not yet, but it's coming out soon. So as soon as I have it, Teresa and I will send it to you. Oops, I went backwards. All right, so here we go. There are a couple of things that were very helpful for these teams. One of them that we find is that people who have been doing interdisciplinary collaboration for a while, they are likely to have higher perspective integration capability because of experience. I think I'm always very fascinated with people who have multicultural experience, people who have interdisciplinary experience. There's lots of research on how it shapes our brain to think differently. This suggests the more we do interdisciplinary work, the more likely we're ready to do this sort of integrative work. We do find that having a very clear project vision enhances perspective integrative capability. We find that perspective seeking, the more that there's people are you engaging and asking people other questions, this is very, very beneficial. And the more that there's general trust, this is really good. I'm sorry, I should not have said project vision. I just read that incorrectly. So trust in collaborators and the increased perspective seeking positively related to perspective integration capability. What does this mean for us as facilitators of these meetings? off, this is not in this slide, but I do think this is about making sure that people feel, safe. They feel like they know everybody in the room. They feel like there's some sort of agreement about the conditions under which they're going to share and get to know other people. And that the more that we can, prime people like we did in this study to recognize that it's an opportunity to be in these rooms, to be seeking out something different than their standard meetings, right? Perspective integrative capability was very positively connected to knowing who knows what. Their scores suggest that they had a strong sense of what each individual contributor in the room was bringing to the table. And we saw an increase in their willingness to interact and engage with those people who are coming from the other side of the campus or the other side of, a particular problem from a perspective or a field. Taken together, I think there's some implications of this. One is that it suggests that PIC is malleable. We saw a change over time. I do think it means that we've got to be more intentional about creating conditions, training conditions, enhancing leadership capability, looking even at competencies of our individual collaborators to see who is it and how can we ready people to engage in these interactive dialogues. It's been a fallacy for a very long time. Put smart people together in a room and they're going to come up with something great. Absolutely not. The knowledge and the technical expertise is just a necessary, it's an initial condition. But when we enable people with the capabilities, the curiosity, and the skills to actually work with one another across the aisle, we're going to see an increase in constructs like PIC. Like I said, PIC, we show it's different from knowledge sharing. We show it's different from knowledge hiding, from conflict, from another number of other variables. I, along with Teresa, hope that we keep using this measure in a bunch of different contexts to try to understand, where does it really work well? Where does it maybe not capture everything that we wish it could? But it is our humble attempt to try to give us some sort of a tool, an instrument for assessment. I personally like our longitudinal approach. I think it shows that we can move the lever and that we can measure the change. We have to we did one training with PIC. I think so many of you, I'm seeing Wayne in the room, Mona, a bunch of other people who are doing other kinds of interventions. Other trainings might also enhance this capability beyond the one that we ran. The paper is, like I said, is coming out soon and should be ready for all of you. But I'm probably with everyone on this call in that it can sometimes be frustrating to see meetings going awry or team members who don't even want to work with one another anymore because things happen as people interact. And I don't have all the answers, but we have to stay hungry to think about how do we better enable and equip the people in our institutions to interact at a higher level of quality so that we get the creativity that gets us the solutions to cancer, to all the big things. Because, sometimes I feel like it's too slow because of the people, not because of the expertise they have. So I'll get off the soapbox here, but I just want to say thank you for giving me your lunch hour if you're on the East Coast or your midnight hours if you're in Australia. Thank you very much for listening, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you so much. That was wonderful. I think we're all excited to hear more about specific measures. I think that's something we've been talking a lot about in the last few sessions. So I'm glad it's great to hear. It looks like we might have some questions in the chat. Kate asks, we have been exploring ideas about how to or whether to assess collaboration readiness before even really writing a proposal together. But if PIC is malleable, is it more important to ensure you choose the right leaders and create intentional training? Is there a sweet spot between the two?
Oh gosh, there's so much to that question. Um, all right, so here I'm going to give you my view on this uh, in three parts. One, I think you have to start from the problem space and ensuring that one of those people in the room really has the track record that's going to make one of those funding agencies say, this is the person or the set of people that's equipped for this project. Around that, some pre-meeting, I think, is more valuable than the collaborative readiness scale to define the problem space. Teresa and I have a different process we take teams through, which is a sort of team mapping scaffolding of what is it that we're really working on. And if you can find the integrative problem at the intersection between those collaborators, then you're going to really get to what's the level of engagement and overlap, and is there a there? Because the true question is this project important enough to you that you'd be willing to move it up your priority list and make it one of your top three? And if the problem isn't striking right at the topic you love, the method you love, you're going to say, yeah, add me on as a contributor, but I'm really busy. And then we see, projects that just really pitter patter. So you're saying, do we have the right people, the expertise then it's demonstrable to NIH and NSF? Can you do this sort of initial project mapping to find the integrative question or two? And then after that, I think you can assess readiness once you can figure out who's really in and who's not. And you can start to do the other assessment. But yeah, I think those are maybe a multi-part answer to that, if that's helpful. Great. Yeah. Yeah, John, I can't emphasize enough the we know from socialization and learning literature that modeling is an incredible means to adopt a new behavior. And when you see a really well-respected individual in an institution who leads from clearly a history of contribution to science, and then they step into a meeting framing a problem, but really trusting that the answer exists in the room and that they're not the only one that knows, it's incredible how other investigators begin to say, oh, okay, this is a way to interact in the domain and in the area. And it just really does shape how people act.
I think there was
Okay.
another question there from Bethany, maybe before.
Let's see.
Comment.
Can you please share more about how PIC differs from your previous work on integrative capacity? So the earlier work on integrative capacity suggested that there were social sort of determinants or antecedents as well as cognitive antecedents. This particular measure, because of its subcomponents of consideration, accommodation, and assimilation, is really emphasizing the ways that one thinks. And so it's steeped in the cognitive process that the individual goes through, leaving still assessment of some of the other social behaviors that were mentioned in the other papers.
There's a question from Tania, whether the PIC was tested at the faculty level or
it
grad
was
level.
Yeah, faculty level. Yeah, actually we tested it in grad student level, interdisciplinary team. We did a lot of the 5 studies cover a lot, but the last one you just saw is all faculty level.
And then Steve was asking, do you see it as important to distinguish between data, information, and knowledge when understanding how new knowledge is created in interdisciplinary teams?
I do, because I think especially one of the last grants I had was with it was a national research training grant with computer science and 5 other physical sciences, where data integration and knowing came from the artifacts of how they know interacting. And so I think sometimes it might just be how you conceptually see a problem, and then you can't uncouple that at times from the tools or the information that is embedded in those repositories for knowing. It gets really, really muddled, but I think you could probably make a headway into boundary objects, etc. Steve. The mapping exercise Teresa and I developed, it hangs heavy on we need to be working around physical artifacts to exogenize our knowing in something we can see. It's very design thinking, very science technology. But I think that might get a little bit towards what you're asking. But I don't know if you have a follow-up comment, Steve.
No, just in some of the literature when looking at knowledge building, there's a distinction between sharing information versus sharing knowledge and on a team.
Yeah.
And some data suggests, like the Grand et al. Paper with Steve Kozlowski published a few years ago, showed that sharing knowledge tended to be better than just sharing information on a team. We had some similar work on the macrocognition and teams model done prior to that found similar kinds of effects. So just when you
Yeah.
look at the transmission of either data to information to knowledge in a team, understanding those distinctions would be, I think, interesting to use to determine what
Yeah.
matters when and for what kind of team.
No, I love your thinking, because what you're also bringing up is this sort of notion of the project life cycle, where it might be you might say, what are we really thinking about? And talk about knowledge. And then as we move into different phases of work, might be important. Those other pieces would need to layer on to provide sort of the depth and to get towards execution. But we have not thought about the same assessment at different stages of project work, which raises a really interesting question. Yeah, that's great.
And then there's a comment from Jenny regarding the pre-meeting idea. Uncovering baked-in assumptions, self-evident truths of disciplinary thinking is a big step with groups that she works with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'd say most of the cases we use in a business school, looking at team effectiveness in a corporate setting, highlight what is, I think, a fundamental truth in the group's research, which is that the launching pre-period can be a really incredible time for any investigator to find out what each individual member is interested in, what they're hoping to get from a team, to decide what norms and ways of working really matter. And we often react so much in the biomedical sciences and the earth system sciences to say, the grant is due, let's go. It's completely skipping the pre-planning, the launching cycle of teamwork. I don't really like the norming, forming, storming model, but sort of the beginning to launch. And I think that's some of the self-knowledge, the more our investigators can get, that there's a ton of work before maybe you even have your first official convening. I wouldn't even say it's a team yet, because some people will walk away from that first convening going, hey, this isn't what I thought it was, or whatever. And then you can have an official launch. But, we in this conversation, though, have to be thinking, like, let's really build the pre-work in, and then increase the trajectory of the team over time. And just a plug, right? We have in-group and sites and places where if you're interested in sort of the heritage team literature that would, reinforce some what I'm saying, I highly recommend going back to some of the basics on some of these questions. Would be very informative.
Right. Bethany asks, that maybe this is in the paper, but she's wondering if you could say more on why you focused on cognitive processes with PIC instead of continuing to include the socio and emotional with integrative capacity.
I think the art of publishing constrains all the things you want to write in every paper, and we're trying to keep the reader really focused on one theme, one element, and it just so happened that it was easier for us to move this through the review process by slicing a piece and building it out. In a perfect world, you could do it all in every paper, but you can't. So TBD on the other ones. We'll get there. Good. So what I'll do, I really like community, and I really like connecting as much around my own work and see what other people are working on. Feel free to email me if you're interested. I can make sure that the InterReach team gets the publication as soon as it's out. Hopefully we cross paths at sites, even if it's virtual, and we just keep pushing forward on these themes. They're very, very important.
Maritza, Kenan slipped a last minute question in there.
Awesome.
So being open to being coached in real time is something that can create very productive team interactions, but her sense is this is largely absent from scientific and academic teams. What are your thoughts?
So I would say first that the leadership development journey never ends. And I think if you can engage an investigator around the science of team science, like speak their language first, and then it's often the case that they'll say, well, how do I do this? Clearly it works. Can you come watch me? Can you come? And then you can open up that avenue. But I do have a number. Well, I think it's more common than you think. At most of your deans, most of the chairs in your departments, if you really asked, do you have a coach? They'd say, oh, yeah, I've been paying for a coach for quite some time. They know that to lead better and to drive, often they're managing million plus in funding, a team and HR processes. But I would say many have kind of secret coaches of the very successful investigators. It's not as uncommon as you think.
Anyone want to slip in one more?
Good. And so one more plug, right? So if Teresa's on the East Coast, she still lives in New York. She's consulting a ton. If you are in an institution on that coast and want to see some of these trainings, fly her out. She's more than happy to do some of this work so you can see it live. Awesome. Yeah, Kenan, I hear you on the non-secret kind. There are a lot. Take a look at opening up a team science consulting request, and people will come that way. Like a link on your CTSA page, make it possible for them to find you. Good. All right, I hope everybody had an amazing lunch and that the rest of your workday is productive and joyful, all the good things.